one opinion it has become difficult to challenge OPML on, even though this would seem the duty of all philosophy since Plato. Is it not, first of all, the immediate content of that which in our countries, by which I mean those whose state takes the form of parliamentary democracy, is the most highly regarded freedom of all, the freedom of opinion? Second, is it not another name for what is polled and pampered and, if possible, purchased, namely, public opinion? After all, opinion polls have surely led to the coining of that most curious of clauses, the French think that, which is odd on at least two counts. For one thing, it is relatively certain that the French, not constituting in any way a subject, are incapable of thinking anything at all. For another, even assuming that the French comprise a coherent group, you would have to sum up the poll in terms of what it actually puts a figure to, and specify as a result, according to our latest figures, after elimination of bias due directly to the stupid question put to them, many percent of French people hold such and such an opinion, so many percent a contrary opinion, and so many percent no opinion at all nevertheless, and this is the third reason for the fetishism of opinion, far from seeing the triplet of conformist opinion, anarchic counter-opinion, and prudent non-opinion take shape in reaction to a murky questionnaire. The prevailing attitude considers these determinations of opinion to be the necessary guide for public action. Take the example of that indisputable Democrat, Michel Rocard, the socialist prime minister whom Mitterrand delighted in keeping on a tight leash and scolding every day. He had the gift of superb political slogans, which his successors never tire of repeating. France cannot take in all the wretched of the earth is one example, which has since assured the success of all the villainous laws against foreign workers. The slogan that interests us here, no less set in the style of language, proposes to France and its leaders another prohibition: one doesn't govern against Poles. So much then for Plato's philosopher king and his obsession with the just and true. Against the authority of opinion, there is no possibility of good governance, to use the ethical jargon in vogue. Opinion rules. Basically, what all this going on about opinion and its freedom, polling and authority comes down to, is that, as far as politics is concerned, though, ultimately, as we shall see, in all instances where thinking seems required, no principle whatsoever should be advanced other than the proclaiming there are no principles. The Democrat will, moreover, happily add to this that holding to principles as though they were absolute is the very stuff of totalitarianism. Only fools don't change their minds, as he will recall, with a kindly smile at your mental backwardness. As he will cite as evidence the lightning speed with which the world changes, this alone sufficing to condemn the inflexibility of supposed principles. No sooner is a principle announced than it is already outdated. As he will conclude that this is the reason why, moreover, there are only opportunistic rules for flexible management, on the one hand, and juridical rules to defend liberties from the obsession with principles, on the other. The freedom of entrepreneurship obviously has priority. Setting up a business or choosing one's bank come before all else, on the side of practical flexibility. Yet, immediately afterwards, on the juridical side, there is the freedom to hold any opinion one wants, unless this denies the right of others to different opinions. All is a matter of management and law, everything else but mere words. Damn! Exclaims the philosopher, overwhelmed by the prevailing attitudes. That's really impressive. Let's take a closer look. And the philosopher then asks the Democrat, if there are no principles, what is there by means of which the diversity of opinions relates to something real? Or, in what way is decision something other than being carried along by the current like a dead dog? What does your law without principles draw its authority from, and why is your flexible management most often a matter simply of going along with the play of forces? To use a little jargon, what is your ontology? To this the Democrat replies that there are, firstly, individuals with their opinions and the right to have them, and, secondly, communities or cultures with their customs and the right to them. Law regulates the relations between individual and communities, while management assures the development of communities for the greater advantage of individuals. The latter are, as such, assured harmony, the former growth, while both acquire harmonious growth and sustainable development. Reeling from the blow of sustainable development, the philosopher can then but confess that, all argumentation aside, it is sadly impossible for him to share such a view. As set down by Plato first of all, the axioms of philosophy cannot be those of the Democrat, understood as the sophist, that is to say, precisely the proponent of the freedom of opinion, including the freedom of completely changing it. That said, the philosopher will agree with the Democrat that in a certain sense only individuals and communities can be said to exist. No God, no angels, no spirit of history, no races, no tables of law. Fine. Individual multiplicities and complex cultures are all one deals with when it comes to existence. Yes, the philosopher today shares with the Democrat, or the sophist, for, again, they are one and the same, this materialist postulate, which can be generalized as follows: there are only bodies and languages. This maxim may be declared to be that of democratic materialism and the active core of dominant ideology. That a dominant ideology has to dominate is not contested by the philosopher, whose consent on this point does not spare himself. He too, the philosopher, is dominated by democratic materialism. Broadly, then, there only exists what the axiom of democratic materialism states exists: bodies and languages. This is the case in broad terms only, however, for on an extremely detailed level there are exceptions. There equally exist things, let us remain vague for the moment, that cannot be identified with either individual singularities or cultural constructions. Such things are immediately universal in the sense that they possess a value, a sort of particular resistance, that can be appropriated by another world, another culture and other individuals than the world. Culture or individuals that participated in their emergence and development, and this despite what there is foreign about the bodies and languages making up their materiality. In short, this kind of thing functions in a transworldly fashion, with world here being understood as a materialist totality made up of bodies and languages. Created in one world, it is valid actually for other worlds and virtually for all. It is, we might say, a supplementary possibility, since it cannot be deduced solely from the material resources of the world which appropriates it, that is available to all. Certainly, such a thing is materially composed of bodies and languages. It is, to put this simply, created by given individuals in given cultures. Yet its process of creation is of such a nature that it can be understood and used in individual and symbolic contexts that are as vastly distant as they are different, in space as in time. This kind of thing can be art, the Chauvet cave paintings, Wagner's operas, Lady Murasaki's novels, the Easter Island statues, Dogon masks, Balinese choreographies, Indian poems. Or science, Greek geometry, Arabic algebra, Galilean physics, Darwinism. Or politics, the invention of democracy in Greece, the peasant movement in Germany at the time of Luther, the French Revolution, Soviet communism, the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Or of the order of love, everywhere, innumerable. Are there yet other things, other types of things? Perhaps. I do not know of any, but would be happy, if these things exist, to let myself be convinced of their existence too, taking the form of sciences, arts, politics and loves. These things, endowed with a transworldly and universal value, are what I name truths. The whole point, which is, moreover, extremely difficult to think through and which will take up almost all the rest of this book, is that truths exist just as do bodies and languages. Hence the exception that the philosopher has to introduce into the dominant context of democratic materialism. 5. Indeed, truths do not constitute an objection to democratic materialism but an exception to it. We propose, therefore, to formulate the philosophical maxim, which is both internal and external, or, as Lacan would have put it, extimate to the protocol of democratic materialism, as follows: there are on bodies and languages except that there are truths. Obviously, this slight transformation changes the status of opinion. We may state opinion to be can be said of bodies or languages in a given language, as soon as bodies and languages are grasped in the same world. A truth can never, then, be reduced to an opinion because it has a transworldly value, such that it can only be appropriated by being grasped, not in the same world, but in accepting a certain, and often considerable, indifference to the particular world or, what comes to the same thing, a certain affirmation of the unity of worlds once these are considered from the point of view of truths. Everything hinges on the fact that, although created in a particular world with materials, bodies and languages, of this world, truths are not principally marked as belonging to this specific world and, as a result, convey with them the possibility that worlds differing in other aspects are, nevertheless, the same. From the point of view of the truths in question, Marx asked how is it that, in our industrial world, we are so moved by Greek myths when Zeus' lightning bolts pale into insignificance next to the potency of a power station. His response that the Greek world represents our childhood and that there is something charming about childhood per se, is as feeble as it is touching. We might add that this origin story is also very German. In fact, the question is badly posed. One should not start off from the difference of worlds, the archaic versus the industrial, and then set up as enigmatic what they have in common, a tragedy by Sophocles, for instance. Rather, one should start with truths, with these thereby affording the insight that, from the standpoint of Sophocles' tragedy, the two worlds can, in reality, just as well be viewed as the same. Truths, and truths alone, unify worlds. They transfix the disparate composites of bodies and languages in such a way that, for a split second or sometimes longer, these are, as it were, welded together. This is why all TMTHs introduce, within the play of established opinions, a sudden change of scale. That which is one in terms of mundane closure attains, through the welding of worlds, a vastly superior unity. Against the democrat, the philosopher raises the objection of TMTH's exception as a change of scale as regards thought. Opinion is limited, its freedom consisting usually of the right to repeat that which holds sway, the law of the world. Only a truth opens the world to the one of an overworld, which is also the world to come, but such as this already exists in the guise of the true. This equally shows that, if the democratic norm of opinion is freedom within the arena of its limitation, the thinking and philosophizing norm of truths is equality in the arena of the limitation. For, faced with a TMTH as when faced with a theorem, it is possible to say that while no one is really free, nor is anyone excluded, yet one can equally say that whosoever places themselves in such a relation is free, this, though, being a matter of that new freedom which unfurls at the level of all worlds and not of one alone. It is for this reason that, contrary to the opinion of the common democrat, there are well and truly principles. We will signal some of these later on, for they can only be set out according to specific truths and not from a formal point of view. There are mathematical principles, or musical principles, amorous principles, or revolutionary ones. Philosophy, however, formulates a sort of principle of principles, in order to think, Always take as your starting point the restrictive exception of truth and not the freedom of opinion. This is a worker's principle in the sense that thought here is a matter of labor and not of self-expression. Process, production, constraint and discipline are what it seeks, not nonchalant consent to what a world proposes. The philosopher is a worker in another sense, detecting, presenting and associating the truths of his or her time, reviving those that have been forgotten and denouncing inert opinion, as he is the welder of separate worlds. To appearance that TMTHS exist, be it as exceptions to the particular laws of a world, in no way exempts us from respecting our materialist axiom, insofar as everything that exists is woven out of bodies and languages. We must be able to explain how TMTHS come to exist as bodies within a given world. We must, in short, be capable of thinking how TMTHS appear. I am a sophisticated Platonist, not a vulgar one. I do not uphold that TMTH